They knew it the whole time.
Yes.
This is Magic Player Logic 101.
Yes,
at
it is.
At its finest.
So now we have a Reanimator deck, and it's a different take on Reanimator too. It's not just like Corey Paxton copied a deck list. It's just a different take, doing battle here, and he's playing against a red-black aggro deck that doesn't really have very much graveyard hate. I don't think it has any at all.
2 cremates in the sideboard.
Yeah, so as we see a Blood Crypt here and a Deathrite Shaman from Corey as he's on his second turn. So this is a deck that doesn't stand up to hate very well, has a difficult time beating Rest in Peace, as we see in old school Mulch.
Yep.
But if it doesn't have to play against those cards, it's very hard to beat.
Mulch and Deathrite Shaman play very well with one another.
Yes. Yes, they do. As we are going to see Deathrite Shaman come across here for 1. And Ian is going to be passed back, to Ian. Now, Ian, Patrick, off to a slower start here, as we do see an Ash Zealot coming. You know, is it important for him to have hands that start with 1-drops? Should he be mulligan for that sort of hand, or like Pillar of Flame or anything?
Not necessarily. Of course, he would like to start with a 1, but even Stormcroak Noble here would have just been bricked by the Deathrite Shaman.
Sure.
So you can't mulligan too aggressively, because all your 1s aren't even good against. Don't even necessarily match up favorably against Ian's 1s.
As we are going to see a Fiend Hunter here take care of the Ash Zealot. Deathrite Shaman comes across for another one, knocking Ian down to 18. And as you said in the top when we were discussing this deck, it is kind of interesting because when you think of Reanimator, you think of a bunch of cards that you can't cast and you need ways to get them in the graveyard. But we see Fiend Hunter's utility just coming out here, taking care of an Ash Zealot and giving Corey some time and some breathing room.
Yep. And you'll see that's a Hellhole Flailer. And I wonder if, given the presence, it appeared that Knight of Infinity was in Ian's hand last turn. Given the presence of another Mulch here from Corey, given that he knows that there's 4 Fiend Hunters in his opponent's deck, I think it's arguable you would want to lead with Knight of Infinity over Ash Zealot there, because you're just allowing Corey to curve into Fiend Hunter there.
Or just to make sure that you can keep giving the beatdowns, not have there be a problem. As Fiend Hunter is, it's looking to be a bit of an issue right now, as we see another Mulch here from Corey, and he's planning out his turn. It is kind of interesting how well Deathrite Shaman does work out in this deck. You don't really want to remove a lot of your humans from the graveyard, but something like a Spirit Falconwrath Aristocrat being down there, it doesn't come back with Angel's Glorious Rise, and it is rather unlikely that he will, bring it back with an Unburial Rites. So to have access to that extra 2 life is pretty nice as well.
Oh yeah, it does plenty of work here, absolutely. I'm surprised we couldn't cram in a couple copies of Faithless Looting into this deck. Oh, I guess Grizzly Salvage is supposed to be kind of that slot.
Yeah, Grizzly Salvage kind of does a makeshift job of that, and I kind of like that card. But Faithless Looting is the more powerful of the 2, of course.
Yes. King Kendall contemplating his next move. He's going to go with Hellrider. And Hellrider triggers for 2 points, knocking Corey down to 14. And then it feels a little early for a Trump block here, but we'll see. Especially since he can gain some life with his... Yeah, and he says bring it. Gives him the bring it motion.
And it is, I think, super important for Ian to have these cards start hitting play. He needs to have these hasters, these heavy hitters in his deck really start hitting. He can't afford for, Stormcroak Noble and Rakdos Cackler to show up. Even right now, Knight of Infamy, we're past the point where that's going to be a big deal. Yep. It's time for the heavy hitters to come out before Corey's able to get his game plan going, as we do see a Grizzly Salvage here from him, revealing Borderland Ranger, Overgrown Tomb, Falconwrath Aristocrat, a Plains, and an Avacyn's Pilgrim.
Grizzly Salvage also playing extremely well with Deathrite Shaman. It's pretty much the only way for Corey to get lands into his graveyard.
Yeah.
So. Now the Deathrite Shaman's other powers are obviously quite good as well.
Of course, of course.
This is another small wrinkle to the deck. He's going to take Borderland Ranger. Corey is an LA area player. I recognize him from PTQs during, Champions Block Constructed. So he's been around for a while.
A grinder.
Cavern on Human. And here's a Borderland Ranger. Tutoring up a land, and Corey's really under the gun here, especially since Ian has an Aristocrat in hand.
Yeah, Falconwrath Aristocrat looks like it's going to be joining the party next turn. Blocking is going to end up being difficult, and what we might end up seeing here, Patrick, is just creatures jumping in the way to make sure that Corey doesn't die. Fiend Hunter is was doing a pretty nice job of stopping Ash Zealot and any flashback being unburial rights, but it might be time for that one to bite the dust.
Oh, I mean, if it's Aristocrat this turn, he just has to chump block. The Hellrider triggers knock him down to 6. The Aristocrat he can't block down to 2, so the other attackers are just lethal.
Oh. Once we do see Ian doing a bit of math here, we do know that he has Falconer Aristocrat. His draw step for the turn was a Thundermaw Hellkite, so he is going to be coming across in the air. But as Patrick said, this is a lethal attack, so there will have to be some blocking here from Corey Paxton.
Hellrider knocking him down to 6. Aristocrat knocking him down to 2 because that's effectively knocking him down to 2 because you can't block it.
Yep.
So I'm willing to bet anything Borderland Ranger is going to be one of our chump blockers, and then Corey has to figure out if he needs to keep the Deathrite Shaman or if he has to chump block with the Fiend Hunter and give back the Ash Zealot.
And you can see he is going through the permutations here of where do I have to block, what do I have to block, what are the costs of blocking with certain creatures, as he's reaching for the non-Fiend Hunter creatures right now, which does make a little bit of sense.
Yeah, it's rough though because he also needs to. He can't even let Ian untap at this point because the Hellhole Flailer just kills him.
Yeah.
So there's a number of horrible things going on if you're Corey right now.
It's all bad.
Yeah, it's all really bad.
It's all just not good.
All right, so those are the blocks. He's getting Hellrider off the table. Jump blocking, Hellhole Flailer with the Fiend Hunter. Ian assigning lethal to the Deathrite Shaman, allowing Corey to keep his not very powerful at this point Borderland Ranger.
Oh, don't judge Borderland Ranger.
And there's a concession.
It's got a nice knife.
And that game right there, that's a huge one for Ian to pick up, because it means now Corey has to win a game on the draw to take this home.
Yeah, and one thing with these aggressive decks too is that you really want to be, obviously as you said, it's really big for him to win that one, but Game 3 being on the play is a huge deal if we do get to that point. Now we do have both players with their sideboards here. They're looking them over. We have them in front of us, but we are going to cut back to the booth because we do have a full year of premium to give away.
Our last trivia question on the Standard Open.
It is our last trivia question on the Standard Open, and it is going to be a fun one. Are you sure you're ready? Are you sure?
Born ready.
All right.
Hit me.
With your best shot. All right. So in this Human Reanimator deck here, there is a card that is a little bit different here. It works as part of an infinite combo, and it combos very well with Fiend Hunter. There's a card that's actually in both players' decks. You have one deck that is red-black aggro-based. You have another one that's kind of splashing for it. So if you're able to name that card that is seen in both decks here, you find one more typically in the black-red aggro deck that Ian's playing, but not typically in this Human Reanimator deck, you'll win a full year of premium, and we'd like for you guys to tweet that answer at #SCGPremium. I think that's a fair question.
Yeah, that's totally
I
legitimate.
don't think that one's too tough.
Not really, no. A little bit tougher than my question, probably, but still.
Well, it's a full year. They got to earn it.
Yeah, you got
You gotta
earn it.
We're just giving things away for free. You got to earn a little bit, right?
Well, that's sort of at odds with the we're giving away a free year of premium message that we're going for here.
Interesting. I hadn't considered that.
Anywho, sideboards.
So I have Corey's deck list in front of me. Down a game, of course, and he has some pretty good options here in 2 copies of Thragtusk, 4 copies of Centaur's Healer, 2 copies of Cathedral Sanctifier, too. So a lot of live gain in his sideboard. To go along with 2 copies of Sorin of Lord of Innistrad, which is a little bit of a slower burn as far as life gain is concerned, 2 Zealous Conscripts, 2 Vraska the Unseen, and the 4th Deathrite Shaman in his sideboard. We're going to see those 8 life gainers almost immediately, and I wouldn't be terribly surprised to see the 2 Sorin Lord of Innistrad join us as well.
On the other side of the table here, we have 1 copy of Appetite for Brains. Very good here, especially with knowing of the deck list. He knows that Thragtusk is coming in, and that is target numero uno for zombie decks if you're playing Appetite for Brains in your sideboard. 2 copies of Cremate to break up any graveyard shenanigans. And the Slaughter Games is probably okay, as he has a lot of very good names. Unburial Rights among them. He can break up the combo. if he's ever worried about that at any point, you can also just name Thragtusk if he's just beating Corey down and they're playing more of a more conventional game. And the rest of his sideboard strikes me as pretty unimpressive here. He has 4 Vampire Nighthawks, which some of these decks are very soft to flyers. These just green-based decks.
Yeah.
Nighthawk is often good against them, but with Corey's deck being so powerful potentially, I don't think you can really mess around with a 3-mana 2-power creature.
Yeah, your beatdowns just have to be better than that and more efficient. You know, there are some matchups where it's great, but I don't think, as you said, that this is particularly one of them.
And then he has a couple of Zealous Conscripts. Actually, Flames of the Firebrand might be fine here because he's got so many mana creatures between Deathrite Shaman and Avacyn's Pilgrim.
Yeah, 2 for 1 on Borderland Ranger and Avacyn's Pilgrim. That doesn't really, I mean, that's not bad.
It's not bad. He's, he would like maybe more answers to Fiend Hunter than just Searing Spear, and so it's possible he wants the 2 copies of Flames of the Firebrand as well.
That is kind of interesting, too, as what we normally see with Reanimator decks, at least when we began this format, what we normally saw is we saw a lot of Thragtusk in these decks, and your goal against these aggro decks, be it zombies or when mono red started to crop up, was just to, cast a Centaur Healer, cast a Thragtusk, and then just start unbarrel Rising Thragtusk, and eventually your opponent would just give in because it's really hard to beat a 5-3 that makes a 3-3 and gains 5 life over and over and over again.
Yep.
Whereas in this deck list, where we've kind of moved away from Thragtusk, kind of moved toward a more combo approach. And if you're Ian, you have to be feeling pretty good about things when you only see 2 Thragtusk in a green-based deck throughout the 75 cards.
Yeah, well, the format definitely started very heavily on Thragtusk. But as decks started incorporating more and more copies of Sphinx's Revelation, that became the best way to actually grind someone out of the game. It's just resolving a big revelation. And Thragtusk has moved much more. At the beginning of the format, it was just in every deck.
Yeah.
And now it's moved to a spot where it's certainly good for some mid-range decks. It's very good against particular decks, but it's not like every non-beatdown deck is starting their deck list with 4 Thragtusk, which is the place we were in, a month ago.
Yeah, that was just the standard. And if you were doing something else, people were asking you, why aren't you playing Thragtusk?
Yeah. And now it's, well, when I cast Thragtusk, my opponent gets to Revelate for 4 cards, and then I have a stupid Thragtusk in play that doesn't do anything.
Yeah. As we see these players both keep their 7 cards. Isolated Chapel here to start for Corey. Strong Kirk Noble there for Ian. So a good start for him on the draw. And Patrick, 1 card that there is in his hand, as we see Deathrite Shaman, is a Slaughter Games.
Yeah, he has his Singleton Slaughter Games. I think 1 Slaughter Games in the sideboard is the correct, like the perfect number, basically. There's a pillar for that Shaman, and now Strong Kirk Noble in for 1.
Grow! It's like a Power Rangers bad guy. You too old?
Yeah, a little too old.
Ah, all right.
Not by much. But
Power Rangers bad guys, they start small, and then when it's time to fight, yeah, the Power Rangers robot, they get big.
Oh, I know that. I'm familiar enough with it to know that.
So that's what it's okay.
Sure. Okay. Cavern, predictably on human, and a Borderland Ranger here. The Cavern very important here, as Corey had no green mana otherwise.
We are going to see the advantage of playing a Strong Kirk Noble in that Borderland Ranger is a human. The Noble can get through. It is going to grow a little more to become a 3/3 now, so it is becoming a respectable force, as we're going to see another one here. And you see Ian with a Searing Spear, that Slaughter Games, and a Falkenrath Aristocrat, so his draw's pretty good.
Like in many works of fiction, humans are scared of vampires and therefore want no piece of the Strong Kirk Noble.
I'm not scared of them. I could win.
I don't know. You probably feel differently if there was an actual real vampire coming at you.
Call me Blade.
Fiend Hunter taking down the big Noble.
And while it doesn't, the Strong Kirk Noble, it can't be blocked by humans, it doesn't have protection from humans.
Yes. Searing Spear at the end of the turn, although the Noble still reset, but back in play.
Give me that back. As we are going to see here a Cavern of Souls. Wouldn't be surprised to see it named Vampire here, but we are going to see a vampire, and it is in the air in Falkenrath Aristocrat.
And the Vampire Squad just trucking on in for 6.
Can't stop, won't stop.
Yeah. Humans versus vampires. We finally get to settle this once and for all.
Our new dual deck. As we do see Borderland Ranger come across here. Again, he can't block anything, and we are going to see a Fiend Hunter. And I fear for Corey, as it is going to take out a Falkenrath Aristocrat. One thing that he doesn't have, Patrick, is that 5th land, as you see 2 copies of Thragtusk and 2 copies of Angel of Glory's Rise.
Yeah, are we going to Slaughter Games Thragtusk here?
Oh, boy.
Because Corey missed his land drop, so it's very attractive to do it here.
Yeah, and, you know, in the game that we're in right now, Angel of Glory's Rise doesn't really do very much right now. There are only 2 copies of Thragtusk, but is he going to name them? Ew!
No.
No, he named Angel of Glory's Rise. Yeah. Wow.
I mean, Corey still needs a 5th land here, but this is risky business because a Thragtusk in this board state might as well be Corey going infinite.
Yeah.
Just game over. Ian's hand is 2 lands.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised by that name. I mean, it's easier to name that because, you know, he does know that Angel of Glory's Rise is there and there are only 2 copies of Thragtusk. Probably didn't expect there to be 2 copies in his hand, but I think that's the only card right now, outside of Huntmaster of the Fells, Patrick, that really does have a huge impact on the game.
Yeah, and Huntmaster of the Fells, it's possible would have been cast last turn. I don't know necessarily over the Fiend Hunter, but you know, there's at least some indicator that Corey doesn't have it in his hand because it was not cast last turn. Yeah. Whereas Thragtusk, he had missed his 5th land drop. I mean, it's the odds that he has 1 in his hand are reasonably good.
I think so. Depending on, you know, what do you think he has? Every other card, I think he can cast at this point. Mulch, Grizzly Salvage. You know, he could have Unburial Rights, but that doesn't really play much of a role right now either, as we see both Nobles come across and grow a little bit. A little knock of the deck.
And there's an Avacyn's Pilgrim, which kind of counts.
Yeah, a little bit.
But now he's gonna fall to 1 from these noble attacks.
What do we see? We see a
Hell
Rider.
There it is.
Scuba Dog! We have our first champion, Ian Kendall. His 2nd Star City Games Open Series crown. He won the Legacy Open in Seattle a little bit earlier this year with Merfolk, and now he can add a standard crown to his mantle with red-black aggro.
Very impressive. It feels like we have the same story in these Open Series. Like, look at all these new fancy decks that are, and then Black Red's just get out of here with this.
Yeah.
Put less random duels in your deck. Just play 2 colors, etc., etc. You can't get too fancy.
Take your beatdowns.
Yeah,
take your beatdowns and like them. Congratulations to Ian Kendall. I mean, we covered all 3 of his matches in this top 8. You know, we did cut across other matches as well, but his wins were decisive in the top 8 this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, did he play the top 4 in the finals here? Was there a close game, really?
Not particularly. There was no game really that it felt like he was in danger of losing at any point. You know, he just really bowled over all of his opponents, and you see the power of Ashtel. You see the power of these other cards that are attractive in red and black, but the one that really does hold everything together, and we saw it in almost all of Ian's game, is Falkenrath Aristocrat.
Falkenrath Aristocrat's raw power is insane.
Yes.
I mean, if you're playing a black-red attacking deck, you can't imagine a card for yourself much better than that one.
Yeah, the card that I always think of when I think of Falkenrath Aristocrat, and this is from many years ago, was Giant Solifuge. How there were games where when your opponent cast a Giant Solifuge, which is that old Captain Tickles, if Evan Irwin is watching, the old 4/1 Shroud Haste Trampler, you were just like, oh, this is a nightmare. But at least that one, you could really block pretty well.
Yeah.
This one is also a nightmare to block and almost as difficult, if not more so, to kill.
Yes.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.